So good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for invitation. And my presentation will be focused on the conservative topic, let's say. It's called Considering Sources, subtitle Improvising Exercises based on treatises, which sounds like nightmare. And first warning, as I'm not trained musicologist, my usage of terms as sources and treatises is very free. So please imagine that I will not be really precise in it. Firstly, there's a question: why shall we even think about improvising some exercise? Because in today's practice and in today's didactical curricula, we mostly with pupils and students use, for example, technical exercises which are written down, and even in a recorder tradition we have plenty of really useful and many times well-tested technical studies and all collections, etc., etc. So there is a question: why to try to find out something else than great masters of recorder wrote for us? My first inspiration was because I'm a recorder player, but half of my job is also conducting the orchestras, and I also sometimes have to play harpsichord and deal with basso continuo stuff, etc. And from this area of yearly performance practice, I realized that when there is a modern recorder player, as modern recorder players, we need really to deal with a lot of repertoire from medieval until contemporary, which sometimes means that we are not focused enough on a particular era. So one useful point would be how can we involve some aspects of didactical curriculum from earlier times, as from 17th and 18th centuries, into our modern practice, and how we can use sources in a way that were probably used in its time. And the goal, of course, shall be that we shall know more about the particular era, and we shall develop our imagination, how to deal with the repertoire. And what I especially like is the term that this is historically formed, not only informed practice, which is a sentence or thesis which I find highly important. So now let's try to think about historical exercises, and just few remarks which are to be found in sources or treatises. If you look on a variety of treatises from 17th and 18th centuries, you can realize simply that technique is always only as a mean in approaching some inventional process, as an inventio, and most of the terms composition and improvisation. I think we already spoke about it this morning. This improvisation term was meant, and this is highly important, I think, because most of the composition and improvisation was not divided until, let's say, 19th or 20th century, perhaps. So that's the first thing we shall think about. And also from many treatises we can realize that particular technical problems of each instrument were not really discussed so often, and if it was for like more noble instruments, that recorder. So we can find a lot about playing organ, harpsichord, violin, and other instruments, but if consider recorder treatises, it's not that chapter. But it's always related with some stylish thing, so style. So my idea was, if we really try to understand early treatises, we can also develop our feeling for the style. The other important thing, many of our colleagues were speaking about public performance, including improvisation, and this can be rather exceptions, because those exercises I want to show are not meant necessarily for public performance. But of course, from history we know many examples where improvising with many rules were part of public performances, all these extempore skills. So I've chosen one chapter from music history, which is Italian partimenti, and so just quickly about what partimento or partimenti is or are. You see, it was instructional baseline using figured or unfigured bass, and it was important part of musical education, mostly in Napoli or around Napoli, and it was used for educational purposes of composers, not only in Napolitan opera. It started in 17th century, and it was in use not only in 19th century, connected with Bellini and Donizetti, but also even around Schoenberg. He was also studying a lot of partimenti. And it's highly focused on harpsichord or keyboard playing. So now, crazy idea, how to play partimento on recorder. First, let's have a look how does the partimento looks like. It's like a typical some bass line with figured bass. So the idea is that we shall know not only how to play a recorder, but we shall acquire some good portion of what we call today music theory, and also what will be used is some keyboard playing. So, the very beginning of harmonical thinking since 17th century is, as we all know, regola dell'ottava, which was the simple recipe how to harmonize the octave, both major and minor. So I only chose major scale, and as the first information which can lead us through the steps to our improvised exercise. So, just two examples, how can we proceed to the exercise. First, we shall be clear about harmonic structure, so we read some chords, and we can try to generate some very simple melody. This melody was written by one student of mine, so you can see there are some not really nice things or even some mistakes, but at least there is some melody. The point is that what I believe, and what comes from my experience, is that when student invents something, it's like a much stronger saved in his mind and even in his fingers. Then from simple melody we can incorporate something that the student knows from a repertoire. So, for example, the famous figura corta, which we can find wherever in the 17th, 18th century, or other figures like tirata mezza and tirata perfecta. And it's important, I think, student doesn't necessarily need to know that this is called tirata mezza and this is called tirata perfecta. We can hide it for them. We just can make the student imitate something he knows from sonata, etc., etc. And already this, if written down, could be good exercise, some technical elements like scales. Or then we can choose some technical, let's say, problem, for example, broken chords, and we can simply generate these progressions of broken chords from regola dell'ottava. And more fun comes when it is transposed, so the real technical problem is now involved. And my point is, you cannot start with this exercise. You wouldn't say, okay, now I need to solve my technical problems in A major, and it won't work as well as if you proceed to the steps from simple melody through some figures until broken chords in transposition. So that was the rule of the octave, but I was talking about partimenti, so let's try step by step to make an exercise. Step 1 can be finding a partimento. Where to find partimenti? Of course, they are all lots of partimenti are online, thanks to this brilliant collection. It's not the only source you can find on internet. There is plenty of them, but this one is really well edited, easy to download, and there is also good editor study on what partimenti are, etc., etc. So what I've chosen is one Francesco Durante partimento from second book of partimenti, which looks like this, or first 4 bars. So we have now this particular partimento, and step 2 could be studying the harmonic, which is something what all Conservatoire students shall do. And from my experience, it's always, at least in Prague, there's this division between practical and theoretical music. And when I was studying, I also had this feeling that, okay, I study recorder, but beside I need to acquire a portion of some theoretical knowledge, and how does it work together? It did not. But now, for example, in Prague, we work quite intensively on methods how to connect really this theory and practical playing. So this could be the first attempt. Study the harmony of this partimento. However, with guitar chords or with numbers, you can imagine, of course, it can be with the help of the teacher. We can talk about the role of the teacher in this improvising style later. Then also we can make the bass line more simple. It's needed, and we just to do something with the style. So, for example, very simple version of this partimento can be the third line, but you can imagine many and many other possibilities. Step 4, and it could be finally the time for a recorder, is again creating some easy melody upon a basso line, which could be, for example, like this. Then there is also a question that student shall perhaps know something about cadences and clausulas in this era, but I think that most of somehow advanced students can just imitate what they have heard in sonatas. So those cantus. Then the student can write a 3-part version. It can be more tricky, but at least simple version is useful. Then, of course, we can upgrade this 3-part version, and where most students ignore just the rules of counterpoint, but they really can do something interesting only by testing and writing down what they like or what do they don't like. So it can be with melodic progressions in one voice, for example, or it could be the lower voice, the altus too, and there can be even full harmonic suspensions. Even there are some spurious spots, it could work. And finally, talking about exercise, we choose some technical aspect of the playing, and we try to implement it into our 3-part realization of partimento. So, for example, this thumb exercise could look like this, but it also can be in other intervals. It can be vice versa, starting from high C, etc., etc. Which is, you know, we all know we have already written exercises on thumb jumps and Rosenberg and many other modern technical schools. But the difference is that when it's invented by student, it has another value for him or her. Or we can choose also chords in the rhythmical patterns. Somebody has mentioned the role of the silence or rests, and it was part of baroque speech where and how to do the rest, so why not to implement some rest into improvised exercise. And also, as I've mentioned, we can improve technique by using figures. It's closely related to what I said about most of the treatises, that the focus was on style, not solely on technique. So again, we can try some parts on figura corta and many other possibilities. Then broken chords and register shifts, which is still quite easy. And one of the final steps could be, for example, the transposition. So we can really have chords in transposition, which is more fun, and or more fingerings, which could be useful for balance of the recorder and etc. etc. So if I try to summarize this approach, how to do the partimento on recorder, we find the partimento or harmonic sequence or just octave regal scale. We shall study the harmony and perhaps the style, maybe. We can simplify the bass line, and those steps are like introduction to harmonic structure of the partimento. Then we try easy melodic lines up and a bass. We can improve it in 3 voices. Then we select the technical problem, starting from thumb technique through articulation, etc., etc. Whatever, that's a matter of imagination. And also we can transpose it into some far scales. Few tips I always like when a recorder student can play at least some chords on harpsichord or piano. So, and as you have seen in regular, like 4 chords actually, so it's not so complicated. And the student also can change harmony a little bit. It's all about exploration. And one important thing is that in exploring the possibilities of harmonized scale or partimento, please don't hesitate to be mean and use simple things first, because they mostly work very well. Why I started to think even about this topic was that I think it's a good collection of few skills and it's emphasizing them. So it demands a lot of analytical skills, harmony, perhaps counterpoint, and it can really empower feeling of style and sensitivity to 17th, 18th century music. And the most important, I think, that's supporting the imagination. In my results, because I started to do those exercises with my students some 1 year ago, what do they invent, and it's related to technique, it makes considerable improvement of their technical problems, more than if they just practice some technical problem from existing book. Some further reading, perhaps, it's a rather academical thing, but I can post it later. So, I exceeded my time, again, sorry for that, and the pool is now open to questions.
Thank you.